Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A lot of the Ole Miss listeners asking for this top 10 players list for this Ole Miss program. We spent all morning putting this one together, going back and forth on a lot of different players, fired up to get into this one. And I think making this list, you truly understand why the boys are so high on this Ole Miss team heading into 2024. Not only is the top end, like the top 5 players that we're going to talk about, I mean, some of the better players that you see in college football, but this team is incredibly deep. We left, so many really good players off of this top 10 list that almost made me feel sick to my stomach. So we're going to do some honorable mentions as well. Fired up to get into it. Before we do it, as always, just want to say thank you to you guys, to the Ole Miss fans. One, it's no secret we are extremely high on this team heading into 2024, but more importantly, the amount of support you guys have shown as we've broken down all these transfer portal commitments, talked in depth about this program. And can't thank you guys enough for rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, let it fly in the comment section. We left a lot of good players off this list. Give some shout outs. Give your top 10 in the comment section as well. We'll chop it up down there. And without further ado, let's go to a transfer that I think kind of just flew under the radar, right? A lot of people wanted to talk about Princely U or Walter Nolan or Juice Wells. Trey Amos played some phenomenal football for Alabama in 2023. I think was going to be their cornerback one for Alabama heading into the 2024 season. Ole Miss goes to the transfer portal, locks him up, coming in at number 10 for this Ole Miss team.
I don't think it hurts, frankly, that he'll probably be somewhat familiar with the Pete Golden system, just given that Pete Golden spent a good chunk of his defensive career in that Alabama room. So he'll have some scheme understanding. I think he's got a lot of versatility. I think one thing you look at is the size he has. He can deal with tight ends pretty effectively. Thought he had a pretty good game against Brock Bowers when you got to see him in that SEC title game, but also has that ability to play really good in coverage. Didn't give up a ton. And again, obviously he's playing in a very deep secondary, so you didn't get to see a ton of them. But I think what you got to see, you see the physical attributes that you need to play. And again, I think he'll be very, very familiar with what Pete Golden wants.
Trey Amos, when we were kind of putting together this list, I didn't really know that he played as much as he did for Alabama in 2023. 340 snaps. And when he played, and you go back and watch those games, he was extremely good. Again, this was probably going to be Alabama's cornerback one heading into 2024. Ole Miss lands him in the portal. Really, really sneaky good get for Ole Miss in the portal. Going to number 9, another transfer portal addition that I do think kind of flew under the radar. And that is Diego Pounds, a 12-game starter at left tackle for UNC. And when you start diving into Diego Pounds, it's really hard to find starting caliber tackles in the transfer portal. Ole Miss found one with the guy like Diego Pounds, 466 pass pro snaps last year, only gave up 2 sacks, only 8 quarterback hurries. And I think what really stood out to me was, all right, how does Diego Pounds make that jump from the ACC to the SEC? Line of scrimmage plays a lot better. I went back and watched the Clemson game, went back and watched the NC State game, 2 of the better defensive fronts that you see in the ACC. Diego Pounds probably played his best football against those 2 programs. I think Diego Pounds is going to be a phenomenal kind of plug-and-play left tackle for this Ole Miss program in 2024.
And what I really think he'll add is some physicality. That's what stands out. I don't think he's like the greatest athlete in the world at that tackle spot, but the play strength makes up for it, and his ability to play really physical. And again, you kind of look, people get the sense that Ole Miss is a throw it around the yard kind of team and they don't want to run it. When Ole Miss is at their best, they're running the ball physically. I think Diego Pounds, again, fits into that system where he is a very physical player. I think he'll help them add that physicality that they're frankly going to need when they bump into those Georgia-type teams. And again, that's where I think he can add something kind of unique, if you will, to this.
100% agree, because we talked about where Ole Miss has to close the gap. It's physicality along the line of scrimmage. And Diego Pounds is a little bit of a mauler at that tackle spot. And you mentioned it, not enough people recognize that this Ole Miss team runs the rock about as much as any Power 5 program that you see outside of the military academies. This is an Ole Miss team that wants to run the football. Diego Pounds certainly going to help in that department. Going to number 8, and I'll take the wheel for this guy. And he's my guy heading into 2024. That is Ulysses Bentley. Ulysses Bentley is probably one of the most underappreciated running backs that you saw in college football, right? Kind of sat behind Quinshon Judkins, averaged 5.7 yards per carry. That was I mean, well above what Quinshon Judkins had for Ole Miss in 2023. And I'm not necessarily trying to drag Quinshon Judkins. I think we all recognize that he is a phenomenal running back at the college football level. I'm more just trying to give Ulysses Bentley his flowers. I mean, 3.5 yards per carry after contact. I feel like the MO on Ulysses Bentley is he's a guy that you want to operate in space, which is certainly true, but he can run with that physicality. Again, that led the team. That was better than Quinshon Judkins after contact per carry. I'm fired up about Ulysses Bentley. And again, I think he fits what Ole Miss wants to do running the football. You talk about getting outside the tackles, getting out in space. That's when Ulysses Bentley does his best work. I think he is going to have a monster season for this Ole Miss program. And going to number 7, and Dill, I'll let you take the wheel on this one. Suntarian Perkins. This is a little bit of a projection, right? I don't think you necessarily look at his play last year in the box score stats and say that's a top 10 player on this team. But going into year 2, I think getting used, I think Ole Miss probably has a better idea of how you want to use a guy like Suntarian Perkins. I think he's primed for a breakout year. And quite frankly, come the end of October, mid-October, we might be talking about one of the better defenders in the SEC.
And I think the big thing is just continuing to develop the play strength, because the only issue at times was him taking on blocks at the line of scrimmage. When he got to get in space, chasing guys down, I mean, you saw those flashes almost like what you saw from Harold Perkins at times when he was playing at his best at LSU. So again, that ability to run quarterbacks down, make those big high impact plays, if he just adds that part to his game of just down in and down out, being able to take on blocks a little more physically, not saying he was a major liability, but there were times certainly when teams wanted to run right at him, he struggled a little bit. I think that just comes with adding strength. Obviously only a true freshman last year. They just get him more college ready physically in terms of his strength. I think he's have a huge year.
Yeah, 2 things, right? One, the physical maturation process, which you certainly expect to come, right? He didn't come into Ole Miss until the summer last year. So this was a guy that a full year under that strength and conditioning program certainly going to help. But then I think just having a better understanding of how you want to use him, because you can use him in so many different ways. And you go back to 2023, and I'm not sure if they had like a real idea of how they wanted Suntarian Perkins to kind of fit into this Ole Miss defense. Once they have a better conception of that and you just kind of let him run loose, and this is a guy that can rush the passer at an elite level. He can spy that quarterback. Closing speed is phenomenal. So many different ways he can impact the game. I'm looking forward to seeing him break out in the 2024 year. Going to number 6, and we had Walter Nolan at 6. And I think that's going to surprise a lot of Ole Miss fans. And I want to preface with, similar to how we just talked about Suntarian Perkins, Walter Nolan's a young cat. He's only going into year 3. That's normally when you see guys along the line of scrimmage kind of break out at the college level. You go back to the 2023 tape, some inconsistencies, but the flashes of dominance, the flashes of why he was the number 2 recruit in that 2022 class. If he can, put it together, become a little bit more consistent, you are looking at a true game record from the inside of that Ole Miss defensive line.
And you're right, because you didn't see dominant play, but you saw dominant moments. And frankly, I don't mean this he was a really good defensive tackle in the SEC, but you just know there's that level, because there is those plays where you're like, man, he can throw guys around. He's extremely athletic, quick off with his first step. I mean, he's got all the makings of being a truly dominant player. It's just got to come together. And again, he's frankly going to be a huge part of Ole Miss taking that step. I think if they get dominant play out of him, the sky's the limit.
Coming in at number 6, like once you start seeing the players that are above him, it starts to make sense. Like at 6, I think that surprises a lot of Ole Miss fans. Some of the players that we're going to talk in the top 5 are kind of true All-American caliber guys. Walter Nolan certainly in that boat too if he does take that step in 2024. Going to number 5, and Dill, this is kind of our guy, right? Chris Paul Jr. coming over from Arkansas. I don't think people appreciate just how solid he's been in the SEC the last couple of years. You take a look at 2023, 74 tackles, second on the team for Arkansas, 6.5 tackles for a loss, 2 sacks, led Arkansas in run stops last year, only an 8% missed tackle rate. That's something that I always look at in terms of your true middle off-ball linebacker. You got to be able to tackle. Chris Paul Jr. is about as steady as it comes, and although maybe not the high upside that Walter Nolan or Suntarian Perkins has, what you've seen over the last 2 years is just a consistent SEC linebacker. That's exactly what Ole Miss is looking for from Chris Paul Jr. in 2024.
Yeah, I don't really have that much to add, frankly. You just kind of said it. Just a really good game in and game out player who can go sideline to sideline, do exactly what you want your
And
middle
it's
linebacker.
not as flashy to talk about, but a lot of programs lack that true linebacker. You know what I mean? That linebacker that's making the good run fits, always
It's
reliable,
hard to
capable.
play really good linebacker in today's game because again, you got to be able to move, you got to be able to take big offensive linemen on. It's not an easy position to play at a really high level. I think he's done it for a long time. It feels like, and again, a guy Ole Miss certainly you kind of continue to. They've had a lot of success with those transfer linebackers.
Yes.
You got to hope he's another in that like
Going
kind
back to one of my all-time favorite Ole Miss players, Chance Campbell, one of my guys. Number 4, Juice Wells. 12 months ago, Dale, we were talking about Juice Wells being the best wide receiver in the SEC. I don't think much has changed, right? He just missed that 2023 year with an injury. And when he did get on the field, like he was a difference maker. You just saw him play, I think, only 50 snaps during that 2023 campaign. What I'm most excited for Juice Wells is you are truly looking at a difference maker wide receiver that you can get involved in so many different ways. And he's going to slot in and play for one of, if not the best offensive minded coaches in the country in Lane Kiffin. You talk about just an absolute Christmas present for Lane Kiffin. How am I going to get Juice Wells involved in this offense? He is elite after the catch, right? 555 yards in the 2022 season after the catch, kind of built like a running back and runs after the catch like a running back too. And something that I don't think is appreciated enough is really quarterback friendly wide receiver as well. A 75% completion percentage when targeted. Not only can he operate after the catch, but this is a guy that knows how to create separation, be a quarterback friendly wide receiver. I'm a massive fan of Juice Wells coming in at number 4.
Yeah, I think he's going to have his game open up a lot by Trey Harris, who we'll see later on this list because Trey Harris, pure wide receiver, he might be the best in the country you're kind of looking at. But Juice Wells, again, kind of what you said, being able to catch the ball out of the backfield, being able to take handoffs, being able to run through the middle and do a lot of things. I think his game is really going to be helped by having a few more weapons than he had at South Carolina to open him up and let him, again, kind of take some of the focus off him, frankly, because at South Carolina, when he was on the field, he was always kind of
You look at Juice Wells, a guy that can operate in the slot really effectively, and you have just an elite boundary wide receiver in Trey Harris, that middle of the field for Jackson Dart to Juice Wells. I think that's going to be a really good recipe for the Rebels. Number 3, Princely U. You're looking at, in my mind, and I was kind of thinking about this, is there a better pure pass rusher in the country? Now, although you need to see Princely U probably play a little bit more physical against the run, although he did lead Florida with 21 run stops last year, I think you bring him in for those game-changing plays, right? When it's 3rd and 7, you need to get off the field. You have a guy in Princely U who say, hey, pin your ears back, go get after the quarterback. That is when he's at his best. I think he's one of the best pure pass rushers in the entire country. You talk about those margins, and we've had this conversation all the time, right? Ole Miss, what's stopping them from winning an SEC championship game is it's the margins, right? You lost 2 games on the road to Alabama, on the road to Georgia. You got to come up with those game-changing plays. Princely U as a pass rusher, I think, can be a guy that gives you those game-changing plays in 2020.
and you have your physical guys. You have guys like Jared Ivey to play the run and be physical on the edge. You needed a guy who can just stuff the stat sheet with sacks. I don't think they had that necessarily last year. And I like Cedric Johnson, kind of similar to Jared Ivey in that way.
Yeah.
But they needed a guy who can just purely, if he gets his one-on-one matchups, he's going to win the majority of them. I think that's where Princely U's kind of been in his college career. And Ole Miss really did need that real artful sack master.
Now I just came up with this in my head right on the spot here. You look at the recipe, like JJ on the inside, Jared Ivey, Chris Paul Jr., some of the better run-stopping defensive players in the SEC. If you can win on 1st and 2nd down, force teams in those 3rd and long situations, guys like Princely U, guys like Walter Nolan on the inside, a guy like Suntarine Perkins, there are so many different ways that you can manufacture pressure on the quarterback. If Ole Miss can get into some of those 3rd and long situations and really just unleash guys like Princely and Perkins, there's not a lot of offensive lines that are going to be able to pick up that unit. Going to number 2, we talked about him, Trey Harris. I think the big thing about Trey Harris is he was the go-to guy, and when he was healthy, he was absolutely incredible. You said it, one of, if not the best wide receiver in the country, 18.2 yards per catch, one of the most explosive wide receivers in the country, can work vertically down the field, only 3 drops all year. I don't think we need to spend that much time talking about Trey Harris. He's our absolute guy. And then Dill going to number one. And I'm just going to go with my guy, my Heisman pick, and that's going to be Jackson Dart. Now, you talk about, I don't know if he's my number one Heisman pick, but you talk about a guy that if you told me won the Heisman Trophy in a couple of months, I wouldn't be surprised. It's Jackson Dart. And I think the big thing when you talk about Jackson Dart is, one, he has, Lane Kiffin calling the plays, some of, if not the best skill around him. And then he took a massive step from 2022 to 2023. Now this is going into year 3 of this Lane Kiffin offense. So you're going to see as polished as you get from Jackson Dart. You go back to him as a high school recruit, a ton of talent, phenomenal athlete, big time arm talent, was a little bit inconsistent in 2022, cleaned it up in 2023, especially pushing the ball vertically down the field. If he takes another step in 2024, you're looking at one of the best quarterbacks in the country in one of the best situations in the country as well.
And you just go to that Penn State game when it really felt like everything was there for them. Trey Harris was totally back, as healthy as he was, looked real. That was his most dominant game by far. You look at that offensive line kind of dealing with a really good pass rush that was getting after him a little bit, but just how quick the ball was getting out, how decisive he was. That was his best game to me by far. That's like the time I think we broke it down the second ended. Like, man, if Jackson Dart plays that way, Trey Harris comes back. They obviously add guys like Deuce Wells into the mix. That you just look, that was such a dangerous looking team against one of the better defenses in the country. He plays like that. Yeah, that's Heisman level football for sure.
And we talked about it. That Penn State defense, we're Big Ten guys, right? We're Michigan fans. I don't know if there was a better defense in the country than Penn State last year. And Ole Miss, and kind of sliced him up. And I think you made a really good point. Jackson Dart put it together against one of the best defenses in the country. And that was one of the healthiest times you saw Ole Miss all year. And I think if you're an Ole Miss fan, you're taking what you saw from Penn State, putting it in 2024 and say, this is going to be an offense that's extremely dangerous, led by one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Dill, that'll do it. Again, quick shout out to some guys that didn't make the list. Caden Prescorn, potentially an all SEC tight end. You look at a guy like Jared Ivey, JJ Pegas on the inside, a lot of good players that were left off the list that, kind of shows how deep this team is heading into 2024. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. We'll cut it off then. Again, let it fly in the comment section. Drop your top 10 players in the comment section. We'll chop it up and we'll talk to you guys later.